Okay. Well, hello and welcome to all of you in Zoom. We're here with Dave Bateman, who's our nursery propagator, the Randwick Nursery. Steve Batley, landscape architect and permaculture expert from Julian. We are on Gadigal and Digital land. Right. Yeah, so we're at the Randwick Community Nursery, which is open to the public. Open, what are the times?
9 AM until 3 PM Monday. We do some Saturdays, like season Saturday, in the current climate.
Okay. And specialising in Indigenous plants to this area.
Exactly, specialising in Indigenous, broader natives, and also other plants that are really suitable to the soil and the environmental conditions.
So this is week 8, session 8 in our series of Gardening on the Wildside, all about native habitat. And we'll be looking at the actual plants and where you can get them from our nursery, and also about propagation. But I'll hand over to Steve right now for our catch-up.
Cool, thanks, Julian. So I'll be quick because Dave's got some really cool, interesting things here. I think the flow of today, we'll do a quick review of last week, as usual. And Dave's going to take us on a very quick tour of just to show you around the nursery and what's here. And then it's all about propagation, so learning how to propagate your own plants from seed and from cuttings. Yep. So by the end of this session, Dave will have you guys all growing your own plants, and you won't have a job in the cell and undergoing their own. I'm sure, but
I see.
yeah, so it's a really good skill to have, and it's fun. It's really can be very rewarding and frustrating at the same time. But it's really good way of getting plants from nothing. So last week, design process. Let's go through the list. Start from the beginning. What's the first thing you might do? So take me through the design process.
Statement. Statement thing.
The statement thing. Yes.
Philosophy.
So philosophy, you might have a design philosophy, you have an overriding vision or thing that you want to create. What else do you need? Wish list. Yeah, a wish list. So what's a wish list? What is it?
What we would like to add according to our ancestors in the landscape.
Yeah.
It's not particular things you're working on, like other or
Yep. Yep. And the wish list is just writing down everything you want. It doesn't have to be realistic, because we have another step, which is the reality check. So you have your big vision and your dream, and then you kind of you better sort of filter that through some sort of reality. What's some of the other early steps? Yeah, a mud map. So basically drawing, showing a layout of the area that you're working with.
Site analysis.
Thank you. Yeah, site analysis, which is spending time observing and understanding what your landscape is like. You're looking at things like the soil and the wind and the sun and existing plants, existing animals, movement patterns, everything that you notice, and get that onto some sort of plan, some sort of drawing, so you've got a record of your observations. Yeah, and now what? What do you do once you've got all that stuff? Is that all that's all the in, isn't it? So it's kind of information in gathering. And then what's the first step you might take when you're actually thinking about laying out the knowledge?
Concept design.
Yeah, concept. So a concept design, which is kind of broad patterns, like you're saying. So starting with patterns. So you might say, it'd be good to have a windbreak here, or a habitat here, or a pond here, and just kind of roughly space things out. And what do you do once you're happy with the concept design, after you've adjusted it to get it exactly as you think you might like? What's the next step? Yeah, before you implement it, you might take the design a little bit further. Zoomers. Yeah. So just another layer of design detail. So you can actually start on paper drawing things to scale. So you might draw your plants to scale the mature size. So you know exactly how many lemanders you are going to pick in the space you've got available. So you start to get the detail, and then you've got your drawings that shows exactly what you need, and you can then implementation. So you start doing it. So
Do you need to be a good drawer?
no, you don't. No, I mean, no. So you can draw it by hand. You can. The question was, do you need to be a good drawer? I think any of you who have seen my drawings over the last few weeks have realised that no, you don't. There's software that you can use, so you can get free landscape design software that will help with that process. There's expensive software that you can use as well if you prefer. Yeah. You can even do like cut out different shapes and different circles that represent different sized plants and use those, get the cardboard and move them around. So there's lots of different ways. I think the important thing is you're just figuring out what you can actually do in real life on plan first, but then you can use that to actually implement or not buy into many of these plans. That's the design process. So here we're up to, you guys probably will be pretty close to having your designs close to finalized. So we can buy plants this week, plant them next week. So next week's going to be planting once we get our design. So I'll pass over now to Dave to take us on the wonderful world of the nursery.
The nursery and all its functions and business and whatnot. So welcome everybody down to the Randwick Community Nursery. Really good to have you all along, and really good to have a sense of what you guys have been up to in the last couple of weeks as well, and kind of concepts of where you are at. So my name's Dave Bateman, and I've worked down here in the nursery. I think this is my 20th year. Largely during the propagation. I've done kind of most of the roles here over the time, but with a particular focus on the propagation. So definitely kept me busy. Definitely kept me engaged for this long, which is why I'm still got a passion for it.
What does it mean then, propagation?
So propagation, that's we can get into that now. Or so propagation is actually where the plants, to put plants into your landscapes and your designs, they have to come from somewhere. So propagation is the process of actually creating them. And I'm going to outline the steps and the methods of what we use and why we do things and the structures that we do them in and the concepts and the kind of cultural activities that we do to get what is essentially just a seed or a cutting of a plant or a division of a plant through to a saleable and also a plantable for you guys unit to go into your design. So every nursery, or it's always, working with propagated plants, whether they're propagating them or they're buying them, especially propagated. So yeah, propagation is just the concept of the start point of where the plants are. But a bit of a background on the nursery. So the nursery's been here for around 45, 50 years now. It's been in a whole different series of machinations over time. For a long time, it was just for the council's use, sourcing a lot of their plants. A lot of potted colour annuals for street amenity plantings, street tree plantings, beach rehabilitation concepts like that. Probably over the last 15 to 20 years, we've really moved into the Indigenous and the native, like really strong focus on that. And that's our kind of, our real specialty. It's something that we're trying to really push. Not only do we find that native plants and the indigenous plants have really good benefits habitat-wise, but they're really well suited to the local conditions. And being eastern suburbs, not everybody lives straight on the coast immediately, but you've got a lot of coastal conditions, very poor coastal sands. So it's quite a harsh area, and sands that dry really quick, and often very windy as well. So the soil will dry out really quick, and the native plants particularly benefit with it to that kind. As far as actually numbers of plants that we produce a year, I wish I actually had a kind of, I could give you a figure. I'll just say this is probably our busiest year that I've ever experienced in the 20 years I've been here. And I'm kind of putting that down to interest in native plants, reaction to the water restrictions earlier, 6-7 months ago, which feels like a lifetime ago now, and then also the whole COVID, closed down all the nurseries, including us, are really busy. So that's been, in my time here, I've never experienced it like this. So, which is great. It's great to see plants showing out. Great to see the nursery being utilised and being utilised by local residents, other councils or golf clubs that support and supply things for. Randwick Environmental Park, where we supply and also take cuttings for. So it's a good mix of things going on. Nursery's got 4 staff, so we've got an apprentice, 2 horticulturists and a propagator. One of those is including Catch our team lead, as well as a supervisor who manages nursery and also speech state functions for council as well. And there's a lot going on in that space. The vast majority of our kind of plants that we supply are in that kind of tube stock, which is what I'll get onto next, and also the 140mm pot size. We do a whole bunch of the larger super dense containers, which we use mostly for structural planting, replacements, or anything like that. So it's quite a diverse mix as well. And it's a plant list that we're always working on board as well. So much, there's so much out there and so much interest out there. But it's a challenge. It's a very good challenge to be able to try.
Do you work together with conditioners?
Sorry, could I get you?
Do you work together with conditioners before?
I would definitely like to see more correct.
Do you mind just repeating?
Oh yeah, yes. So the question that I was asked was that do we work with Indigenous people? We do to a degree. I would like to see more. There's a very, very good outfit down at La Perouse called Indigigrow, which is an Indigenous and social enterprise, which is also doing native plants and bush tucker plants, and something they had knowledge as well from that community. I would definitely, because that is something that does get asked a fair bit, and it's something that there's a bit of a deficit on mine, and that's something I'm always open to learning more. And plant use, and it comes up a lot, and I get asked what's the actual Indigenous name for the plant, and that's I'm the first to say I'm deficient in that area. Was there any other questions on nursery function, or we'll have a look around as well. We'll have a look at the structures, and that'll tie in with the concepts that I'm hopefully about to explain to a degree. So we'll get straight into that. So going back to the question about what is propagation. So propagation is actually many different methods. It can be from seed. So here we've got some of the local Hakea species, which is a member of the Proteaceae family. You can see the seeds have opened up. And there's 2 seeds per follicle in this species. And some nurseries will actually put these on a barbecue or hit them with a blowtorch to open these up. These are heat reliefs, these particular species. These ones were collected locally, so that ties into the whole indigenous function as well. So it's a local species, it's a local genetics of the eastern suburbs of a particular area. So we'll be able to go back and have confidence that this is an eastern suburb sourced Hakea in this case. There is variation amongst species as well, so that's coming into the indigenous function. A Hakea from the eastern suburbs, the coastal strip, so will differ in its genetic makeup of species, say Campbelltown or the Blue Mountains and that. So there is variation amongst those. Why genetics is important for native plants is because there's localised area and conditions. Plants in the Blue Mountains may not be as coastal resilient to soil and salt winds, and also pests and diseases. So if you have a really wide genetic makeup of the plants rather than just collecting just from a single source, then that's strength as well, strength in the species. So then we'll also do cut-ins. So we'll go out on site, we'll go out to local reserves, and we'll actually collect cut-ins. We'll go and cut bits of plants with the concept of inducing them to grow their own roots. And that ability is locked in with inside a lot of plants. So whereas seeds are all genetically different because it's sexual reproduction, cuttings, unless you're sourcing the cuttings for the whole range of different plants on site, they are largely clones. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. Bad thing if you want to incorporate genetic diversity in a site or keep genetic diversity in a site. But from a more ornamental nursery aspect, if you have elements of a plant, it could be habit, it could be flower colour, it could be flowering length, you may want to replicate that over and over, in which case you have to use a clonal method of propagation. So these were originally just bits of sticks bits of plants, I shouldn't call them sticks, that we've gone out, cut the plant off and induced it to grow roots. So now, and I don't know if any of the Zoomers can see, this is a particularly special, this is a grevillea, so grevillea being a member of the Proteaceae family. This is actually a proteoid root, which is a real soil, it's a root specification to adapt to like really low nutrient soils. It's one of their abilities. That's a side point. So we've gone out, we've induced it to grow roots, and once that gets tubed up, is a nest stage like the tray at the end. It's then on its way. It's on its way to be an independent plant. And once we harden things off again and get them going through different conditions, hopefully it's setting it up for a good success rate. Julian.
What do you use to induce them to grow roots?
Well, we do, and the question was, what do we use to induce them to grow roots? In most cases, you don't actually have to apply anything particular. We do use a cut-in propagation hormone Some of the species, like things like the daisies, scarolas, brachycones, yellow buttons, so you probably wouldn't even have to really use it. We use it with species like this so they become like really uniform, or as uniform as we can get them, because you want to be able to work with the whole batch rather than go to these, like a grevillea cutting like this. We do use the propagation hormone on to generate it, to produce that root and produce that response. And the whole response is actually just like if you cut the cell and you form a callus or a scab. It's kind of what we're doing here. In that, whereas the scab is it's just trying to seal the wound. It doesn't know that it has to be a skin cell or a lung cell or a heart cell. It's the same thing with the plant. When it gets prepared, it forms a callus of cells, and then by putting it in the propagation hormone, the media that we put it in and the conditions that it does, it then goes on to go, oh, kind of, I've got moisture, I've got warmth, I've got support, I could be a root cell. And you kind of trick it in that way to then go into the developing the kind of root system, which is the end result. Some things are really, really easy. Things like the yellow buttons here. Yeah, these are really straightforward. Really quick turnaround. These guys here are probably only a month and a half old. And you can see that the root system's really holding the little cell together. We probably could have even done them earlier. I'll say I was saving them for you guys. But yeah. Whereas this guy here, he's a bit older. So he's coming into about the 4-month kind of mark. So to give you a kind of idea of what we're looking at. So the nursery, we do produce a lot of plants by cutting. We produce the vast majority of the kind of plant list that we produce by cutting, but probably the vast numbers of what we produce is by seed. That's just because it's more time efficient. You can go out and you can collect massive and massive of seed. Hopefully it's on a developing farm and get a lot of numbers really quickly. And a good example of that would be something like the Psinia here, the Psinia nervosa. What's called isolators, and probably don't know if you've used it in some of the design, certainly. Very evident down at the environmental park. To go through and do each of these by like a division, when we could just produce them by the seed, it's far more time effective, and also we get into genetic diversity by doing the seed. So we collect from local reserves and local bushland reserves, seed banks, pocket parks, planting around the nursery. We do buy some seed as well, and that's particularly for things that locally may not be flowering very well and following up in seed set. We might also sometimes miss seed and then have to purchase it.
Do you guys sell seeds?
We don't. No, we do get a lot of inquiries on that. We just produce the plants.
Do you have anywhere you recommend any guys that like to buy seeds?
Yeah, you can, depending on the species that you're after, one of the that question was where could we buy seeds? There's online seed merchants that do native seeds. Bunnings is actually doing more and more native seeds in packets. Something like harvest seeds and native plants. You know, they could get their seed merchants as well.
We as the public allowed to take seeds from banking on the ground walking through the park? Are you able to walk through?
If you're in a national park, no. If you're in a council reserve and it's not a protected plant, which it won't be, that would have no problem. Yeah, as long as you're not physically out that damage with the plant, and it's not, there's no broader ecological reason, it should be fine.
If you don't use propagation planning, encourage the to use.
So that question was going back to the propagation hormone question and what would happen if we didn't use it. It would be a slower response. And this is generally, some things would be fine without, as I was saying, some things would be fine. You might get very patchy strike rates and might have a very long lead time until the cutting is at an ability to look after itself. The process is actually within the plant. We're just trying to trick it and speed it up. You still get a result, absolutely.
Would you put it in water and soil?
You can put it in water, depending on what type of plant it is. If it's a particularly soft-footed little annual, would strike really well. They do strike well in water, especially if you've got small numbers. That's not a problem. You know, anecdotally, you can use honey and aspirin and all different things like that. There's a whole bunch of techniques out there, whether they're beneficial. There's anecdotal evidence that they still work, and if you're getting a good result at the end, that's the best result for propagation. If you've got a really healthy plant, it's well developed and it's in good quality and ready to go back into the plantings. Yeah, that's a win. That's a winning model.
So you guys are not organic?
So the question was that are we organic? No, not as such. We're definitely trying to minimise all our impacts in that regard. Nurseries, some will be, very few nurseries would be fully organic in production at this point. And we really minimise our spraying. The amount of spraying that we do for the plants now, compared to what would have been done, even when I started, they were spraying every week. Didn't matter whether there was pest or disease or not. They would just, but that was the culture at the time. Because of the plants that we're doing now, and we're growing now, and we're promoting now, very, very few problems. So as far as that aspect, we do use an inorganic fertilizer at the moment, and that's contained within the pot mix. And there's also soil weeding agents and aspects like that. But it's a bit of a balance until the materials and products come out for nurseries to really go in that organic avenue. We're in the process of minimising as much as we can. So as far as, I showed you the Hakia seed, so that's one aspect. Sienna might be able to hold up some of the woody pears. Yeah, to kind of give you a bit of a different view of what gets dealt with. So this is the woody pear that I got. And that's a really, really unique local plant. Not in large numbers, all that, huge group, which is essentially the side. one of the behaviour. And then, you know, other types of seed going on to things like the Dorianthus here. So this is the Gommy seed. It comes out in these, yeah, that's how all the Gommy lilies and the Dorianthus start. Like a little papery little wedge. And there's hundreds and hundreds of those, you know, held within the seed capture that we're going to go out and collect. And then, yeah, the ubiquitous lamandra. So you see it everywhere down highways and coastal plantings, and you know, for a bush regeneration plant and a large amenity plant, that's where all the new stuff from. So there's other techniques beyond the cutting and the seed growing. There is division that we very occasionally do in this nursery. Some nurseries focus divided, and they're mostly grasses and things like lilies, things with a rhizome, where they can be dug up and divided. Into multiple plants out of the one. We don't tend to do too much of that. It's not a broad scale kind of thing that we do. And then there's other techniques like tissue culturing, which is beyond our nursery capability as far, and that's like a micro propagation under very strict laboratory conditions, and yeah, very, very specialised technique. But from that, much like doing the seed, you get numbers. You get huge amounts and numbers out of literally like a small amount of plant material. But again, they clone them. So that's good if you want to maintain that that line. And say if you've got a good example would be something like Grevillea Robin Gordon. That's probably the biggest sold grevillea in the world. If you want to know that you're always going to be buying and planting a Robin Gordon, then they have to be grown clonally. Otherwise, other genetics and other traits come in, and what may have been a Robin Gordon might have a different flower colour, would be a vastly bigger plant. So you lose that predictability.
So if these guys were going to take a cutting, say, of the yellow buttons there, I'm sure Julian will buy one of those from you, and if you can use that as a demonstration model for us. Could you maybe take us through the steps, starting with, I noticed you got some perlite and
exactly.
some of the soil, how would they go about?
Yeah, so just, so this is yellow buttons, Chrysocephalum, one of the local species, and all up and down East Coast, hundreds of different forms of it. So if I was going to be out in the field, and we're going to do a bit of this later as well. So, I would essentially go through, so one thing I forgot to look at. So, if we were going to do the yellow buttons today, so let's picture us, we're down at Randwick Environmental Park and Days, snooping around getting cuttings down there. I'll be going through and essentially just getting material like this. It's probably about 7 centimetres long. So obviously I would have got the best material. If the plant was looking scrappy or tired, or if it was, say if it was really, really woody, I probably wouldn't, I would move on. But if I found a plant like this, and it had really nice, healthy material on it, I'd go through and I'd probably get about 1,000 of these off it. Take any of the flowers off. Now, if they're a different type of cutting. This is what I call a soft tip cutting. The grevilleas that we looked at before is a semi-hardwood. And there's also a third, which is aptly named the hardwoods. We don't do hardwood cuttings here. They're mostly deciduous species, having very few native deciduous trees. Yeah, it's not something that we need to do. So I grabbed my soft tip cutting here. If it was a semi-hardwood, I would definitely wound the base on this guy here, because it's soft tip. It's got lots of energy in it. It's the current growth. It's really ready. It's raring to go. It's full of sugars. It's actively growing, and it's going to develop that callus and then the root system, which I just chopped off. But that'll come back. It'll produce that really fast. If the fellow staff here do our job correctly. And then we'll put this under mist, and we'll have a look at the misting system later. That's one of the keys to the success of the cuttings and the success of the propagation program here. And then I choose what mix I put it in. So different plants require different aspects of a mix. You can make a propagation mix out of many different materials, whether it be straight potting mix in sand. You could use other materials like the perlite, which is the white material in this mix here, which is also mixed in with cocoa peat. We use cocoa peat as a water holding substrate. So you get in the drainage and the bulk by the perlite, which is an inorganic material, basically like a glass, mixed through with cocoa peat. So the cocoa peat is an offshoot of the coconut industry, and the cocoa fibre is a more environmentally friendly option than the peat moss. Typically, we don't use peat moss in this nursery because the harvesting techniques, and it gets dug out of Northern European and Tasmanian peat bogs, which is probably better that they stay in situ, and we can use the byproduct of the coconut industry, which would have only just gone to waste. The reason why I've got peat moss here today is that we're going to be doing in the future some fern propagation by spore, and funny enough, they do like peat moss over cocoa peat, so a bit of an exception. I don't normally have it here, so. Then you've got to decide as well what you're going to put the cutting into. So you could put the cutting directly into a little tube. Exactly. Yeah, you could put your cutting directly into a tube. You could put it into a cell container. This is what's called a hyco. Alternatively, you could put it into the little cell trays like this. That's holding 130 per tray. So it allows you to really get some numbers up. Alternatively, you can even use a flat seed tray. Just like this, and you could probably fit about 130 into that as well. So it's depending on what type of cutting you're doing. Most things at home, you could use a little pot. You could use a little bit like a container like this. The most important thing is the cleanliness of the propagation mix and the container and the environment that they're in, and the structure that you put in them into. I think at home, one of the things that really is a hurdle to get over at home is to keep the cut-in well misted, not too wet, not too dry. You want it saturated in an environment that it doesn't die off and wilt. when things die off and look, it's very hard to get them back. So, going, you know, it's a propagation mix and propagation with a real balancing act. Too much water, not enough. Too much heat, not enough heat. Too much light, not enough light. It's just a balance. And once you find that balance, and it can be as simple as just having a plastic bag, a clear plastic bag over the container. So it's acting like a little glass house at home. You don't need a fancy structure. It could be a little kind of plastic commercial cover. It's basically a little mini glass house. And having structures like that really help you get success in that cutting. So,
with that cutting that you've got there, how would you, if you're putting it in a pot mix, how would you do that?
So, yeah, I've got, can you put some there? Yeah, so we've got our propagation mix here. So this is probably our most commonly used propagation mix here. So this is the cocoa peat, that's the brown material, and it's kind of pulverized down and well hydrated. And then the white material is the perlite. So perlite is bulk and also the aeration, because you do want the cuttings to breathe. You want good oxygen down in the mix. Otherwise it will get really stagnant and block off. So if I was going to go through, I've got my cutting prepared and I'm happy with it, and I'm like, yeah, this is definitely going to grow and it's going to be great.
Sorry, Dave, is that?
Oh yeah, so that's a very good question. It's actually, we refer to it as 5-2. So it's 5 parts perlite, 2 parts cocoa peat. And that's a balance between good aeration and water holding. So I would then go get my cutting. If I wanted to use a cutting hormone, I would dip it into that. And it's just a gel. Maybe I could get Sienna to grab another thing I've got. And it's just a gel. So I've filled the mix up. I haven't pushed it in. Like I haven't rammed it in. It's
Grab it up.
yeah, that's all right. Yeah, I haven't pushed it in. I want it firm enough that it supports the cutting, but I don't want to. You know, the last thing you can do with propagation mix or potting mix if you're potting things up at home or planting things in the ground. You want to firm them in, but you don't want to compact it so it's rock solid. You want a good change of air through the mix, and you'll have a much healthier food system as well, and also success in the propagation stage. So I get my gel. And I let it soak in for, you know, just a couple of split seconds. And then
What can you use?
you can then go back to use, and the question then was what you could use as an alternative. You could use those things like your honeys or your other techniques like, you know, the aspirin, whether they're actually, as I was saying, whether they're actually proven in a scientific, you know, result base, you know, it can't go wrong.
What if you don't use gel?
If you don't use gel, for a plant like this, and the question like following on for that was, if you didn't use the gel, a cutting like this, it'll probably still strike. It shouldn't have a problem. Things like the grevilleas and the harder wooded cuttings, now where it's going to become a bit more evident. Little softwood plants like, you know, even with stringer that I'm sure you're well accustomed to. Native daisies, scarolas, goodenia, which is some of the plants you're going to be working on next. They'll strike quite well without the gel.
What is the gel?
The gel's a mix of it's indole. It's an acid basically. It's
Acid.
yeah. So
You just buy it like a gel.
yeah, it's all pre-made, and it comes in different strengths to correspond with different cutting types. So the harder the cutting, the stronger the percentage of the indole butyric acid, I'm pretty sure. So,
It is chemical.
yes, it is, yeah.
It is not part of the ground.
As far as the residual effect, again, that's a good question. A question I can't answer. Yeah.
How far in did you push that?
All right. So I probably was about halfway. Looking at extracting that out, it was up. So just to where that kind of lower leaf's coming out. Didn't want to bury it. Didn't want to have it too high. So when I go and water it, it falls over. Didn't want to have it too deep because what will happen is that those lower leaves there will, because they're in contact with the potting mix and the propagation mix, they'll rot off and the cutting will go pulpy and a mess and will eventually succumb. So yeah, I'd have it a bit higher, nicely firmed in, and then repeat with about another 900 of them. And this is what I was getting back to. Definitely not. The cutting, propagation is a bit of a race, in that the cutting now, apart from the sugars and the energy contained within the plant now, and a very, very rudimental ability to actually uptake water, it's a race to get this on its own roots, or some roots starting to form, and then it can start to look after itself. So by putting them out directly in the sun, they would really succumb. Yeah, they burn off really quick. There's just no ability of the plant to recover from that.
Yeah, so full shades.
Light, definitely. Indirect light, cover over the top. Things like that. Yeah. Warmth is good, yeah, exactly. So in the middle of winter, you probably give it a miss. You look at other things to be doing. As the plants start to generate and come back into spring growth, that'd be a really good time.
Do you always put the cutting the mix will be below the leaves, also will it join where the leaves start?
Yeah. So that question there was, would I always do that to the depth of the plant? Typically, yes. Yeah. It's a general rule. General rules are, can be broken. But in this case, I would keep it fairly consistently across them. And something like this, you're probably looking at roots in about 3 weeks. That's right. It doesn't need to. Yeah. The only thing we're wanting to grow at the moment is the roots. So by putting on growth later on, that's the next stage. So the little plugs, yeah. Yes, exactly. So then we would go through and tube these up, tube them up into that or even smaller. Something like this, something that we're actually doing is just potting these directly. Not all the species in this size, mind you, but it's a real time saver for us, because we know the plant's going to survive. We've worked with it for so long that we know we can plant that, and it's still a really good plant, and we can take a step out. By taking a step out, we can do more cutting. So
we've got about, I think, 10 minutes for the Zoomers.
Yep.
Are we able to take them on a quick tour?
Absolutely.
And then
we'll tie in some of the propagation with the structures, and then hopefully kind of tie some things up in that regard.
So where do you want to take us?
So let's directly go straight out into the first glass house here, into the cutting glass house. And keep those concepts fresh in your mind.
Do you mind taking that with you?
She should be good. So come in, yeah, come in, everybody.
A year and a half away.
So this is the black temperature for us.
Yeah, so it's not actually so much temperature per se, like we don't want it cold, we don't want it too hot, but we want it moist, we want it humid. And that's the thing. So, as I was describing the plastic bag effect, say, over the cutting, that you could do at home, the glass house is essentially just a glorified plastic bag. You know, what you can do at home. So it gives protection from the elements, it gives protection from the weather. And so we couldn't have it any better. Yeah, so as we're just saying, and that's just fresh water, that's completely potable water, there's no issue there. That misting system comes on and keeps the cuttings really fresh. You don't want cuttings to, as I was saying before, you don't want them to wilt to the point where they won't come back. And the idea of the misting is to keep all the cuttings really cool and moist. So while they're developing the root system and starting to strike that root, there is also heated elements in the benches. So you're actually getting a root zone temperature as well, which is around 26 degrees. At home, that wouldn't be something I'd be really worried about. But definitely keeping humidity up around the cuttings, that's your key.
So you need to water it every day?
You need to be monitoring it and making sure that it's not too wet and definitely not too dry. You can overdo it, and that's something that you do see as well. And we sometimes, it's a balance, even for us it's a balance of how we're managing things in that regard. Yeah, so then so the mistings, like one thing to keep in mind, it's not an irrigation system as such. It's solely just about to keep the cuttings nice and cool and keep them nice and turned in. So then they last until we get to the point where we can take them off the bench, like we've got here. And these ones are into the next stage where they're kind of hardening off, you know, to the next step. And then we'll come through all these cuttings and individually tube them up and get them really hardy and ready to go into the next step. So, why don't we go through and we'll see the seed glass house, and we'll have a look at some of the examples there as well.
So you've got some flowers.
Yeah, so ones like that, they've actually developed them when we took the cutting. Inadvertently, they might have some of the ground.
1.5 meters. Yeah. Pointing it at the ground.
Oh, so it's not time set. It's depending on the environment. And when it drops below certain threshold, it triggers the mist. It's like a thermostat.
It's running a workshop.
So I've rabbited on it for a bit too long, so I apologise to any of the Zoomers that didn't get to see any of the other structures, but hopefully we've kind of outlined enough of the techniques. Gives you a really good understanding.
So they're just
it's open,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because we've been pushed for time, so any of the Zoomers who were wanting to come in and see any of the structures and the concepts, by all means, come down. Ask the man, I can show some of the structures. And Monday to Friday, 9 till 3. We're here.
What was your name?
My name's Dave.
And hopefully you guys on Zoom can see in the background all the different plants. So it's a really cool place to come, and you can buy tube stock or slightly more advanced plants or really advanced plants. There's a lot that you can get here. Lots of these plants are really good for habitat creation. So you'll find a lot of the species that we've been talking about in the workshops here, as well as other places, of course.
A really big thank you to Dave.
That's right.
Thank you. And so we'll be saying goodbye to you guys pretty shortly. Next week, of course, will be week 9. We're actually planting out the plant according to the designs from these guys here. And that'll also be part of our Eco Living Online program. So I'd highly recommend that you Google or go to Randwick website for Eco Living Online. I don't know, there's probably 20, 30 workshops on the whole range of topics coming up. So check that out, including celebrities. Dr. Carl's in one, Craig Rucastle. For us, Charles Massey, one of the heroes.
That's the guy, yeah.
That's right. Paul of the Reed Warmer. So he's actually, you can see, will be on the Q&A panel after the Biggest Little Farm. So for us, we've got a screening of the Biggest Little Farm, and followed by a Q&A panel, which includes Steve, Charles Massey, and Laura and Grant from Feather and Bone, and Marat from Udi. So goodbye and thank you. And as always, it's really, really helpful when you do the feedback. Thank you very much. See you later.
We all know now. We know